Welcome to a life of possibilities and inspiring conversations. My name is Nkandu Belts and our guest today is Jack Delosa. Jack is a self-made millionaire and he is the founder of the Entourage. Welcome to the show, Jack.
Thanks for having me, Candu. Really good to be here.
Welcome. So, Jack, how did the story start? How did you start the Entourage?
Yeah, well, I think I was very, very young when I decided that I wanted education to really comprise my life's work. My parents ran a not-for-profit organisation called Breaking the Cycle when I was very, very young, sort of 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. And they'd take long-term unemployed youth off the street, they'd put them through programs both in a workshop environment and out in the wilderness and, experiential learning. And then they'd place them into employment and they'd purposefully take the most at-risk youth, right? Young adults, people that were on and off drugs or in and out of jail or from abusive homes, and they'd ultimately place them into employment. They were the best at what they did in Australia. When the government restructured the way they issued capital out to not-for-profits, Breaking the Cycle was unsuccessful under the new regime. So that organisation ultimately collapsed. So I think at a very young age and quite a developmental age, I was shown that education can transform even the most challenged of lives and people from the most challenged of backgrounds. And it needs to be underpinned by commercial nous if you want to do it in a sustainable and a substantial way. And so, that was always my dream. And so once I felt like I built the foundation in business from a credibility standpoint and a reputational standpoint and a financial standpoint and a network standpoint, I always wanted to return to building an education institution, starting with entrepreneurs and innovators, people who pioneer and push things forward. So in 2010 we launched the Entourage, and today it's Australia's largest education institution for entrepreneurs.
So for anybody who's wanting to start a business, because you said you had that experience, did you work for somebody before you started your own foundation? How did you do that?
It's funny, I was actually talking to one of my staff today about this. I've never worked for anybody else, which is really quite limiting, because all I've ever known is what goes on inside of my businesses, which means I don't have a very holistic view of the world, perhaps. But no, my experience, I suppose I dropped out of university in 2004, started my own business, and my education was failure, because back when I started in business, wow, it's 13 years ago now, there wasn't an entourage, and there wasn't, entrepreneurship wasn't trendy, and there was a lot less education available, there was a lot less networks available, a lot less capital available, and so there wasn't really a path that one could take, hence why I've more recently started the Entourage. But really my education came through trial and error.
So, and we have, for example, students are starting to prepare for their exams at the moment, and not everybody's going to get straight A's. What advice would you give to the ones that, probably are not interested in the university education?
The traditional education system is completely unsatisfactory in terms of developing human beings and even developing good learners, right? The very fundamental premise upon which it's built, it's not meeting. Once upon a time it did, right? In the 1800s, when it was about putting people into factories to fulfill essentially similar functions, whether they're growing up in Brisbane or Melbourne or whether they're growing up in New York or LA, you want them all to have the same skills so they can fulfill the same function. It worked beautifully for that. It's just that the world moved on. And is today moving on at a faster rate than ever before. So even exams is a good example, because you can look at, if an individual goes into an exam, you're not allowed to talk to the person next to you, you're not allowed to pick up your phone, you're not allowed to jump on the internet, you're not allowed to be resourceful, right? If you were to ask me what's the number one thing I look for in people that I'm employing within my organisation today, it's resourcefulness.
Exactly.
And so I take a bit of a challenge with traditional exams, because it puts people into a simulation which is completely counterproductive to the very capabilities that they're going to need to demonstrate when they step out into the real world. So if you're not good at high school or college exams, it probably just means you're going to do something really meaningful with your life.
Yeah, so it's not the end of the world if people don't get students don't get the straight A's.
No, it's not the end of the world. For me, it's more than that. It's indicative of somebody who's probably an experiential learner, somebody who probably likes to think outside the box, and somebody who probably thrives in an environment that isn't high school. And that's really good, because the world is an environment that is the opposite to high school.
And you've been running your business for a number of years now, and as you're saying, it's one of the best so far and in the country, and I think it will continue to be the best because I've been in your programs and they're just wonderful. So what would you say to upcoming entrepreneurs or people that are interested in entrepreneurship and some of the challenges that they might face in running their own businesses?
Yeah, well, I think that I don't carry the view that everybody should be an entrepreneur. My sort of overarching message, if you like, is figure out who you are. Try and develop a level of self-awareness, then build a life and a career or a business that aligns to that, right? And so whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you're somebody that's building a meaningful career or whether you're a painter or whether you want to be a great father or a great mother, for me it's about really identifying what kind of life do I want to create, and then whether that fits into a traditional mould and a traditional path or not. Pursue it unapologetically. In terms of entrepreneurship, for those that do want to go out and start their own business, the biggest challenge is always a personal one, I believe. It's the emotional fortitude required to live in what can sometimes resemble absolute uncertainty, right? As an entrepreneur or somebody pursuing a meaningful career or anybody that's challenging themselves in any field of life, we're always outside our comfort zone, right? By definition, we're trying new things. If it's a new thing, it's not an existing thing, and therefore it's probably something that you're uncomfortable with. And so it's about, for anybody pursuing a dream, in my view, it's about being comfortable in being uncomfortable, and recognizing that particularly when everybody has a challenging life, right? But particularly when you pursue a non-traditional path, whatever that is, the degree of challenge will most likely be even higher, right? And so it's just about recognizing that that's inevitable, anticipate that, be okay with that, and continue to build your life and your career or whatever it is in accordance with what you want.
And now I'd like us to touch base on the Entourage Fund. So how does that work? Is it only for young people or it's for everyone?
Yeah, so the Entourage Growth Fund is something that we set up to invest in essentially Australian upstarts. So if you look at the Australian investment ecosystem, there's a lot of capital and attention around tech seed stage businesses and tech startups and tech upstarts. The Entourage Growth Fund is really an investment fund that we've set up to invest into high growth businesses, regardless of what space they may be in. Now, obviously, we look for scalability, but predominantly we're looking for great people who are values aligned and who are doing something truly innovative within their industry. So it's just about enabling the entrepreneurial ecosystem to become more fertile in a way that isn't just exclusive to tech.
Let's go into your book, Unprofessional. In there, you talked about talent being overrated. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I think I was expressing my hope. Talent is overrated. Yes. So a gentleman called Jeff Colvin, who was a writer for the New York Times for many, many years, wrote a book called Talent is Overrated. And what Jeff Colvin did is he looked at the greats of history, people that we would consider to be great, be that individual a Picasso or a Tiger Woods or a Jack Welch who was the CEO of General Electric for about 20 years, Michael Jordan, Oprah Winfrey, right, J.K. Rowling. He'd look at all of these different examples and he asked the question, how much of a part did natural talent play in enabling that person to achieve their level of success? Because the old research suggests that you're born with predetermined boundaries, and the best thing to do is is work out what your boundaries are so that you can stay inside of them. Is it, you know, the old
So in a
style.
way, we're sort of like trying to keep everyone inside the boxes.
Yeah, it's just a very limited view of human potential, right? Like you were born with a predestined capability in certain fields, and you can't move beyond that, right? So it's quite old school today, thankfully. And what Jeff Colvin was pointing to in his book was that the new research indicates that talent does exist. You give somebody a golf club, they'll hit the golf ball better than somebody else with it. So a natural talent, a natural aptitude in a particular field does exist. However, in achieving success, and particularly high levels of sustained success, the science shows that talent is irrelevant.
Welcome back. So, Jack, you've done an extensive research on great leaders, you know, living greats, past and present. What has been the common theme, you know, with the people that have been highly successful in their lives as well as in business?
Yeah, I think the main common theme, the main thing that a lot of successful people have done the same is that they've all done it different.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is there's a high degree of self-awareness and who am I and what's important to me and what contribution do I want to leave, what legacy do I want to create. And then there's an element of their work or their career, be they a Michelangelo, you know, sculptor turned painter, or a Nelson Mandela, or even a J.K. Rowling, or an Oprah Winfrey, or a Richard Branson. You know, it's about they're often very clear on who they are, and then their work is often an extension of that, and they build a life that's representative of all of that holistically. And so I think they've all done it different according to who they are and what worked for them.
And I can see that, you know, you've taken this holistic approach in succeeding in your own life as well. What are some of the tips that you use to balance your life?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And it's definitely a work in progress for me. It's something I'm still very, very much learning. Yeah. You know, and the reason I say it's still learning, because for me, my work is an extension of who I am. And so for me, business is highly personal.
So your vocation and vacation is sort of like...
completely the same, yes. Right? If you come over on a Sunday, you'll see me in my trackies reading, or studying, or thinking, or play. You know, like it's just who I am. It's what I do, and it's what brings me the most joy. So I don't see a division between the two. Hence why sometimes I do need to force myself to pause in order to rejuvenate and all of those sorts of things. But you know, I like to think of it rather than work-life balance. I like to think of it as work-life harmony. And when you're doing something you love, I think work-life harmony, you know, is present.
Last year, you published a book, Unwritten, and you talked a little bit about spirituality. Are you spiritual?
Highly.
What do you mean by that?
You know, I'm not a religious person, but I'm a highly spiritual person. So the way I view life and the part that we play in it, is all viewed with a very spiritual lens. And
what are some of, because, you know, when people talk about spirituality, they, you know, have certain practices. Do you have any spiritual practices that, you know, that you do religiously? You know, like other people, they do meditations or affirmations in the morning. Do you do any of that? Yeah, so I think everybody has, you know, reconnection strategies, if you like, and that is things that we do, and it's always an individual thing, but it's things that we do that when you do, time stands still and you disappear and you're immersed in that moment, right? And for some people that's painting, for some people that's playing guitar, for some people that's time with the kids, for some people that's time away from the kids. For me it's journaling, meditating sort of, reading, time by the ocean, running. You know, once a quarter I go away to the Blue Mountains for a few days by myself and just journal and light the fire and walk, you know, around the bush and under waterfalls and all of that sort of stuff. So I find spiritual connection and meditativeness in those experiences. And then talking about painting, you did a bit of a tour in Europe, and you wrote about, the paintings in the Sistine Chapel. Knowing that, he wasn't a religious person and the Pope commissioned him to make these paintings, what's your take on that?
That's one of the most interesting paintings in history, in my view. So Michelangelo painted the roof of the Sistine Chapel, and it was commissioned by, I think it was Pope Julius II to do that painting. Michelangelo was a sculptor. He'd never painted anything in his life. And it was on the roof of the Sistine Chapel, which is a very prominent, important building for the Catholic Church. And back then it was illegal to paint God in the form of human anatomy, but there's one tile on the roof of the Sistine Chapel where God is reaching out to Adam and their hands are almost touching. And God around him has this sort of sheet around him and angels around him, and it's the form of a human brain. Back then, human anatomy wasn't as understood as it is today, so it wasn't recognised for what it is back then. Michelangelo knew more about human anatomy than anybody else, because he and Leonardo da Vinci independently would often, this might sound a little bit gruesome, but would actually perform autopsies on people after they had died.
Yes,
in order so that they could better capture human beauty. That was also illegal back then. And so he painted God in the form of a human brain, essentially, which had it have been seen for what it was meant, probably would have seen him executed. And so you go, well, why did he risk his life to embed that message into that particular painting? And nobody really knows the answer. But in my view, I think he was pointing to the fact that we haven't created, God didn't create us in His image. We've created God
in our own image. Yes.
And that Michelangelo was of the view that you don't need to go through a church in order to reach God, but rather it is found. That energy or that source is found within. And so I think he was pointing to a couple of those principles.
So what are you reading and why?
Good question. The book I'm reading at the moment, so I'm reading two books, and they're could be more different if they try. One is The Hard Thing About Hard Things, which is perhaps the most honest book I've ever read. It's a business book, and it focuses on the realities of running a business rather than the romantic Hollywood version. Rather than fantasies. Right? And then it's a very practical, hard look at the realities of business, right? Which is fascinating. It's so incredibly interesting and true. The other book I'm reading is called The Seat of the Soul, which is a spiritual book, which talks about human and spiritual evolution, which I'm fascinated by.
Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as I did. We'll see you next time.